Hello everybody and welcome back to another CB Showtunes tutorial. Now today's tutorial is all about functions and how we can use them. Now this tutorial will be a little bit longer than our previous tutorials because it has a lot to cover. So without further ado, let's get started. Now if you are familiar with any form of programming, you've always used a function before. Whether it's batch programming, which means that you're going to call a function like this, whether it was JavaScript programming, which you would call the function like this. And of course, you could have even C# functions, which basically ended like this. Or HTML, I mean, sorry about that. So each different type of function has their own unique setting. Now for C#, you're going to be using a function like this. So inside Unity, there are many different automatic functions that come with the engine. And we'll be covering most of these functions today. There are so many more that we will not be covering, but we're going to cover the basics. And of course, we'll be covering the free format ones as well. So without further ado, here we go. Now the first function we're going to start with today is void start. Now, void start is a common function which you will most likely be using a lot inside of Unity. Basically, the void start function happens once you press play or once the scene loads. So anything within this script will activate when that scene starts. So you can consider this function as a box as well. So basically, if I want to store all my functions regarding say our boolean start as false or true, right? And I want to store them all into one box. Well, I could store them into this box right here, and so on. So let's go ahead and talk about variables that are functions similar to void start. These would be like, say for instance, void awake. So void awake happens right before void start. It's like, I guess you could say just a previous predecessor to the void start. So if you want something to happen before anything that happens in the void start function, you'll put it in the void awake. And then before that, you're going to look at a function called void on validate. So void on validate is specifically used for inside the Unity editor. So basically, if you want to update something inside the Unity editor, then you would be using on validate. In comparison, if you want something to update in game, then you'd be using these two. So to get in more depths with these three, let me go slowly through each one. So for an example on void on validate, if you wanted to create a GUI button inside your inspector that allowed you to create a character. So you would choose the head, the body, whatever, and then you press this button to create that object. So on validate would allow you to actually create that object once that button is pressed, and it would store it, somewhere inside your assets folder. And if you went over to void awake, say for instance I wanted to set all my physics immediately before I did my void start function. So I would put all my physics or graphic updates inside the awake function. And lastly, it would be the void start function. So this would update things like the player's state. Say for instance, if they're in the idle state or if they're inside their running state. Basically, it's the starting state for every single character or movement system inside your game. So I guess that's the best explanation for those three. Now another common function you're going to be using is void update. This one right here is pretty self-explanatory. It actually gives you a pretty good example whenever you are first loading up your scene or first loading up your programming. Yeah. Anyway, I cannot think very well when I'm talking. Okay, so anyway, the void update function happens every single frame. So whatever's inside this will continuously update throughout your scene. Functions similar to this would be, say, for instance, void late update, which I put that into the wrong order. Let me go ahead and reset and put it down here. So the late update is going to happen after the void update function. So it's still going to be happening every other frame initially. And then, of course, you're going to have a void fixed update. So void fixed update is going to happen every couple frames. Now, it's basically going to be controlling like your physics and your graphics and all, similar to how you would have like the void void awake function work. So you want to put most of your physics effects inside here, mainly because you don't want your physics to constantly be updating and taking up a lot of your CPU and RAM. So you want to be able to set up most of your physics inside your fixed update. And anything that needs to be constantly updated, like your movement system, you would be updating inside your void update function. Okay, now we're going to get on to our void on trigger enter. Let's go and put void on trigger stay and void on trigger exit. So on trigger or on collider or on collision enter, basically all three of these have a specific function. So on trigger enter is going to call the collider on your game object. So if I selected my player, let's actually pull that up. I have a couple projects open. So if I select my player and I go over to the collider, right? So if this is set to isTrigger and you have this inside your code on trigger enter, so whenever something enters this trigger right here, it's going to do something. So it's going to activate this code. And it's only going to activate once because it's going to be entering this trigger. Now, the same thing works if you have like on collision enter or on collide enter. This basically is going to be the same effect, just based on the fact that it just got hit if it's going to be on collision enter. So yeah. Then you have on trigger stay. This is basically if you enter the area or something enters the area, then something's going to happen, and it's going to stay inside the area. So while whatever's inside that area is inside that area, then it's going to continually activate this code or this box. And then lastly, on trigger exit or on collision exit, it's going to have something happen here. And this is also a one-time thing. So it happens once and then it's done. Alright, so I hope that's a pretty good example of that. And lastly, what we're going to talk about is our free format. So whenever you're creating a function, you're going to start it out with void. As I explained earlier, void is the C# version of a function or box or categorization and all. And we need to give this void a name. So, or this function a name. So I'm going to call this function movement. So now, or actually no, we'll call this locomotion. Locomotion. So basically any form of movement that we have inside our game or for our character and all is going to be within this void. So now I could just say var x is equal to input.getAxis. And if you've ever seen me code before, then you probably have seen this code over and over and over again. It's just a really useful piece of code that, you know, I just can't put it down. Alright, so I'm going to call in a public float, and we're going to call it speed, so we could actually set that up. And if you remember our tutorial about floats, you know, then you'll understand that. Super awesome. Let's go and change that to vertical. Okay. And transform.translate. And all I'm doing here is I'm simply putting in the movement system for this. And lastly, since we have this void locomotion, we basically have not put any form of equation inside the parentheses, because that's what these parentheses are for. But we still want it to actually move. Now, if we just ran this code, it's not going to move at all because there's nothing to update. Basically, void locomotion is a custom function that we created. It's not actually going to do anything. So what we want to do is we want to create, say for instance, void update, right? So now since we have a void update inside our scene, all we have to do is call our locomotion function. So we could say locomotion, put in our parentheses, and if you want to set your condition, you could set it right here as well. Super awesome. But yeah, now your locomotion, anything within this box and category, will run inside your game. And it's now very clean, so if you wanted to find an error and it's saying that you have an error in locomotion, then you could simply go over to the locomotion tab instead of having to write everything like this and just get lost inside your own code. So it's very useful, ideal to set up specific functions for specific actions. So yeah. Alright, if you guys had any questions regarding this tutorial or any other tutorials, make sure to leave a comment in the comment section below. I hope you liked this video. Make sure you like it, subscribe, check out some other videos. If you have any sort of idea on video games or anything that you want me to cover inside our next couple tutorials, make sure to leave a comment inside the comment section below, and I'll see you guys next time.